All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies. Today's episode is on the unquiet death of the Rosenbergs, which I believe is a film that we will watch in parts. So if Comrade, you can get that going.
Thank you. I also would like to say that tomorrow is the anniversary of the death of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, and also Juneteenth. Um, we are doing the we are doing this film tonight because this is a case that still has gone unanswered for many years. There are still many inconsistencies with it, and it really does look like that at least Ethel Rosenberg herself was completely innocent and was framed up by her brother and the government for a completely needless death. And so tonight we will actually be doing portions of the movie. It's not going to be the entire film. If you do want to see the entire film, it will be up on the YouTube site of the Party of Communist USA, and we do highly encourage you to go check that out at your own time. But tonight we'll be showing the most poignant pieces of it. So the first off is we'll be showing three different clips. One is of the death of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, their arrests, and their trial, which will be separated into three different sections.
They were said to have stolen the secret of the atomic bomb. Bob Considine, an eyewitness to their execution, files his report.
This was a grim spectacle. This kind of a ghastly climax to 2.5 years of
fraud and a
demonstration.
If it had been a frame-up, which
by the American system of jurisprudence that we're willing to give any accused person the ultimate intent is to save his or her neck. These people could have saved themselves up to the last few minutes of their lives. Those curious lives that had started out in the poverty of the Lower East Side here in New York, and which for a time had shown great promise. He was a graduate electrical engineer. She had hoped to be an opera singer. Had a good voice. Became a stenographer, and they were sort of childhood sweethearts. Everything to live for. A couple children, residents in this great country, and with all of its opportunities. They died differently, gave off different sounds, different grotesque manners. He died quickly. There didn't seem to be too much life left in him when he entered behind the rabbi. He seemed to be walking in a cadence of steps as if keeping in time with the muttering of the 23rd Psalm. Never said a word. Never looked like he wanted to say a word. She died a lot harder. When it appeared that she had received enough electricity to kill an ordinary person and had received the exact amount that had killed her husband, the doctors went over and placed the stethoscope to her and looked at each other rather dumbfounded and seemed surprised that she was not dead. And she was given more electricity, which started again a kind of a ghastly plume of smoke that rose from her head. After two more of those jolts, Ethel Rosenberg had met a maker. She'll have a lot of explaining to do.
It is not.
This was a...
Russia successfully explodes its atomic bomb. The comforting illusion of an atomic secret disappears in a mushroom cloud over Siberia. It is replaced with the concept of atomic theft. And to J. Edgar Hoover, finding the thieves is both a political necessity and a personal crusade. For if the so-called secret of the atomic bomb has been stolen, then it has to have been stolen from under the nose of the FBI. Former FBI agent Richard Brennan.
The pressure was almost unbelievable in some ways, not only from the Bureau of the FBI that we were getting it from. Mr. Hoover was getting it from outside. He was getting it from Congress. He was getting it in the daily press. The people of the United States had had a rude awakening, and they wanted something done about it. Russia would not have had the potential itself to have built an atomic bomb from scratch. In other words, they had to steal it. And we were the only ones who had it. They had to have stolen it from us.
They were bound to find it, anyone who tried. I myself believe that the Soviet, who were not then the tremendous figures in physics that they have become, but were certainly up and coming and full of brilliance, that they would take about 5 years. Well, they took 4.
It is February 2nd, 1950. Klaus Fuchs, British physicist, is arrested in England. Fuchs admits passing atom bomb information to an American agent of the Russians during the war in New York, Boston, Santa Fe. May 23rd, 1950. Harry Gold, bachelor chemist from Philadelphia, arrested. Gold says he was the American to whom Klaus Fuchs passed atom bomb information. June 16th, 1950. A former Army sergeant stationed at Los Alamos, New Mexico during the war, arrested. His name, David Greenglass. The charge, passing secret atomic information to the Russians through Harry Gold. July 17th, 1950. Julius Rosenberg, brother-in-law of David Greenglass, arrested. J. Edgar Hoover says Rosenberg is another link in Soviet espionage apparatus, which includes Dr. Klaus Fuchs, Harry Gold, David Greenglass. Rosenberg terms the charge fantastic, something like kids hear on television. August 11th, 1950. Ethel Greenglass Rosenberg, arrested. She, her husband Julius, and her brother David Greenglass are held in $100,000 bond each. August 18th, 1950. Morton Sobel, arrested at the Mexican border in Laredo, Texas. Sobel claims he was kidnapped by Mexican secret police. It is less than a year since Russia exploded their atomic bomb. Now these 5 Americans are in prison, accused of having made it possible. In 6 months, they are to go on trial in the America of Julius. Morton Sobel, arrested at the Mexican border in Laredo, Texas. Sobel claims he was kidnapped by Mexican secret police. Actual trial transcript. Chief Prosecutor Sapol opens.
This case is one of unusual significance. The evidence will show that Sobel and Julius Rosenberg, classmates together in college, dedicated themselves to the cause of communism. This love of communism and the Soviet Union soon led them into a Soviet espionage ring. We will prove that the Rosenbergs devised and put into operation, with the aid of Soviet agents in this country, an elaborate scheme which enabled them to steal through David Greenglass this one weapon which might well hold the key to the survival of this nation, the atomic bomb.
The prosecution's first witness is called Max Ellicher, boyhood friend of Morton Sobel, college classmate of Julius Rosenberg, a former communist. Now fearful of prosecution for having lied on a loyalty oath, he has become a government witness. During the war, he states, when Russia and America were allies, he was visited by Julius Rosenberg. Max Ellicher.
Rosenberg said there were many people who were implementing aid to the Soviet Union by providing classified information about military equipment, and asked, would I be able to get such information? He told me that Sobel, who had been my former roommate, was also helping.
Although accusing Rosenberg and Sobel of trying to enlist him in what he calls this espionage business, he admits on cross-examination he never passed any information to either of them. Next for the prosecution, David Greenglass. He is Ethel Rosenberg's brother. When arrested, he pleaded guilty. The government postpones his sentence until after the trial of his sister and brother-in-law. In 1944, he was an Army machinist stationed at Los Alamos, New Mexico. While on furlough in New York, he says, he drew a sketch for Rosenberg of a high-explosive lens mold he worked on at Los Alamos. He tells that Rosenberg said he would send someone to Los Alamos to pick up more atomic information in the future. He said Rosenberg cut a Jell-O box in 2 pieces to identify the courier. The green glasses were to keep one half, the courier would present the other. On a Sunday morning, June 3rd, 1945, he says, Harry Gold knocked at the door of the Greenglass apartment in New Mexico. David Greenglass.
He asked if I were Mr. Greenglass, and I said yes. He stepped through the door and he said, Julius sent me. I walked to my wife's purse and took out the part of the Jell-O box. Gold produced his piece, and we checked them, and they fitted.
Greenglass says he gave Gold 2 more lens mold sketches and written data. Prosecutor Roy Cohn.
Did you at a later time give Rosenberg a description of the atom bomb itself?
I did. In September 1945, when I was again on furlough in New York, I drew up a sketch of the atom bomb and prepared about 12 pages of written material. Julius read it and he said, "This is very good. We got to have this typed up immediately."
Who did the typing, Mr. Greenglass?
Ethel did the typing.
After the arrests of Fuchs and Gold, Rosenberg urged him to flee the country, he says. Rosenberg told him to have passport pictures taken and gave him an escape route. Ruth Greenglass, although a co-conspirator with her husband David, is not indicted. She appears as a government witness. She supports her husband's story in all essentials. Now Harry Gold takes the witness stand, the self-confessed courier for Klaus Fuchs. He'd been sentenced to 30 years earlier. He is not a defendant in the Rosenberg-Sobel case. He is a government witness. Gold says that in spring 1945, his Russian espionage superior, Anatoly Yakovlev, told him to pick up information in New Mexico. Harry Gold.
Yakovlev gave me a sheet of paper on which was typed the name Greenglass, an address in Albuquerque, and the words, "Recognition signal, I come from Julius." Yakovlev also gave me a piece of cardboard which appeared to have been cut from a packaged food of some sort. It was cut in an odd shape, and Yakovlev told me that the man Greenglass, whom I would meet in Albuquerque, would have the matching piece of cardboard.
He says when he arrived in Albuquerque on a Saturday night, he found that the Greenglasses were not at home. Harry Gold.
I stayed that night. I finally managed to obtain a room in a hallway of a rooming house. And then, on Sunday morning, June 3rd, I registered at the Hotel Hilton under my own name.
He says he returned to the Greenglass apartment early Sunday morning. Harry Gold.
I knocked on a door. It was opened by a young man of about 23. I said, "Mr. Greenglass?" He answered in the affirmative. I said, "I came from Julius," and I showed him the piece of cardboard. Greenglass went to a woman's handbag and brought out from it a piece of cardboard. We matched the two of them. Greenglass told me that he would have the material on the atom bomb ready for me that afternoon.
He returned, Gold says, took the atom bomb information, and started back east. 2 days later, he says, he gave the information to Yakovlev, the Russian, in New York. Emanuel Bloch does not cross-examine or challenge Gold's testimony. The government presents a copy of a registration card from the Albuquerque Hilton Hotel. It has the name Harry Gold, the date June 3rd, 1945. A total of 23 witnesses testify for the prosecution, but only 4, Ellicher, the Greenglasses, and Gold, give evidence directly related to the alleged crime of conspiracy. Julius Rosenberg is called to the stand. Emanuel Bloch questions him on the matter of the Jell-O box.
Did you ever have any transaction with the Greenglasses in which a Jell-O box was involved?
No, I did not.
Did you cut any side of the Jell-O box at any time?
I did not.
Did any such incident ever take place?
It never did.
Did your wife ever type any material for transmission to the Soviet Union?
She did not.
Did you ever receive from David or Ruth Greenglass any information or any sketches concerning the Los Alamos project?
I did not.
Did you ever ask him or Ruth to get you such information?
I never asked them.
Now Ethel Rosenberg takes the stand. She too swears the testimony of her brother and sister-in-law to be false. She reveals that the Greenglasses were jealous of them and angry about money they lost in business with Julius. On cross-examination, the Rosenbergs refuse to answer questions concerning their political beliefs. They insist upon their innocence. Morton Sobel is implicated by a single individual, Max Ellicher. The prosecution further implicates Sobel in connection with the trip he took to Mexico in June 1950 and his use of aliases there. Morton Sobel does not testify. He pleads not guilty. Defense attorney Bloch sums up. He asserts the case against the Rosenbergs depends upon oral evidence only. There is, he says, no documentary evidence that ties the Rosenbergs to espionage. Emanuel Bloch.
Put yourself, if you can, in that defendant's box and ask yourselves, if my brother or my sister or my child were sitting in that defendant's box, would I convict them on this kind of testimony? That's all I ask you to do. And I say, if you do that, you can come to no other conclusion than that these defendants are innocent, and you are going to show to the world that in America a man can get a fair trial.
Prosecutor Sapol sums up for the government.
The history of this Jello box side, the greetings from Julius and Greenglass's whereabouts in Albuquerque come to us not only from Ruth and David, but from Harry Gold. Harry Gold, who furnished the absolute corroboration of the testimony of the Greenglasses, forged the necessary link in the chain that points indisputably to the guilt of the Rosenbergs. We know that these conspirators stole the most important secrets ever known to mankind and delivered them to the Soviet Union. No defendants ever stood before the bar of American justice less deserving of sympathy than these three.
To the jurors now belongs the verdict. The 11 men and 1 woman have listened for 14 days. They are to deliberate for 8 hours and 45 minutes. Now the jury foreman announces the verdict. Vincent Labinette.
We find the defendant Julius Rosenberg guilty as charged. We find the defendant Ethel Rosenberg guilty as charged. We find the defendant Morton Sobel guilty as charged.
It is April 6, 1951. Judge Irving R. Kaufman sentences David Greenglass to 15 years in prison. He acknowledges his cooperation with the government. The day before, Morton Sobel had been given the maximum prison sentence, 30 years. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg face Judge Kaufman.
The issue of punishment in this case is presented in a unique framework of history. It is so difficult to make people realize that this country is engaged in a life and death struggle with a completely different system. I consider your crime worse than murder. I believe your conduct in putting into the hands of the Russians the A-bomb years before our best scientists predicted Russia would perfect the bomb has already caused, in my opinion, the communist aggression in Korea, with the resultant casualties exceeding 50,000. And who knows but that millions more of innocent people may pay the price of your treason. Indeed, by your betrayal, you undoubtedly have altered the course of history to the disadvantage of our country. We have evidence of your treachery all around us every day. The civilian defense activities throughout the nation are aimed at preparing us for an atom bomb attack. It is not in my power, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, to forgive you. You are hereby sentenced to the punishment of death.
And with that, we will stop for our first round of discussion. Comrade Andrea, you have the floor.
I had a quick question. If anybody knows, why were they the only ones that got the death penalty? We've said in some classes before how it was to send a message to either Russia or other people, but did some race play into that? Why did only they get the death penalty? I find it quite unfair. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Comrade Angelo, would you like to respond to that?
Yes. It's interesting. This part of the film doesn't mention that of a city with such a large Jewish population, New York City, especially that time, that there were no Jewish people on the jury. That's very interesting because you're supposed to have a jury of your peers, and they didn't have that. Why it was them? Because they were both active in the Communist Party. The other ones were ex-communist. These two were active. It was a message that all the communists, all the Reds were going to be rounded up and dealt with. Remember, the war ended in 1945. For the first time, they opened up what? In Europe, the concentration camps. They saw what the government could do. So that's the answer.
Thank you for that, Comrade Angelo. And in fact, we'll be showing a section of the film that does cover that section. And in fact, the FBI had dossiers on all the jury members that the prosecution had, but the defense did not. And these were some of the more conservative people out of the entire 300 jury pool selection that was handpicked for this. So you could almost say it was kind of imbalanced at the start. Did you want to respond to something as well?
Yeah, I think it was mentioned in the Sons book. I forget the name of it. It was like in honor of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, but it was written by the Sons. I think it was a deputy secretary that told one of the Sons that while he was the, I guess, general secretary or something like that, when his parents were executed, when the parents were executed, he said, well, all we never wanted them to die. All we wanted were names, because then they could continue their witch hunt. They could continue exposing the Communist Party and making them seem like spies or a problem, like a something that's that would be against the U.S. government and the people. So he said, all we wanted were the names, but they called her bluff, and they didn't lie. So all they had to do was confess that they were guilty, but that would be lying. That's all.
Thank you, Comrade. Comrade Pennsylvania, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Okay. So obviously accusations of espionage and being a spy is a common tactic to be used against major communist figures in this country. And the point that I want to make is that we're experiencing a similar thing with a sort of new McCarthyism as far as ties to Russia. And that is what separates us from much of the left. And is the Russia issue and the special military operation issue. But with somebody like the Uhuru movement as an example, is the same sort of
60 seconds
accusation and the consequences that follow still happen. So therefore, as one of the few parties of the left of this country that does support the Russian military operation, we are essentially putting ourselves in the same crosshairs as the Rosenbergs. The last thing I want to do is give us delusions
90 seconds,
of
please,
grandeur, but at the same time, steal yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade. Comrade, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of echo what had said and the similarities between the Uhuru movement and this case. It's an attack on our civil liberties. It's an attack on free speech and free association. And the last comment I wanted to make is it just me, or does the narrator sound like Ron Perlman?
No, you're not wrong about that, but I'd have to double check the movie's credits to see. I'm not sure if it is, to be honest. Okay, with that, we will go on to the second part of our presentation tonight. This one is actually going to be concerning some of the testimonies and thoughts of the jury and the witnesses. And this is about a 13 or so long clip. So,
who had difficulty separating fantasy from reality. The government claimed the Rosenbergs were Soviet spies. The government chose to prosecute the Rosenbergs for conspiring to commit espionage rather than for having committed espionage. By using conspiracy, the government gained the advantage of never having to prove a substantive crime actually took place. The government's conspiracy case against the Rosenbergs depended almost solely on the testimony of David and Ruth Greenglass. Beyond Harry Gold, there was little or no corroborative support for their testimony. Gloria Agron, assistant to Emanuel Bloch, the Rosenberg defense lawyer.
It was really the word of the Greenglasses against the word of the Rosenbergs. The way that the conspiracy law under federal statutes works is that the unsupported word of one person is adequate without any confirmatory evidence. This conviction could not have stood in a state court like the New York state courts, because there you have to have at least two witnesses to the same act or corroborating evidence. The government, the United States government, is free of this. In a case that's a capital case, I think they have an obligation to go beyond this.
David Greenglass had stolen a piece of uranium from Los Alamos during the war, apparently as a souvenir. In early 1950, the FBI questioned him about the theft. He denied it. In June 1950, FBI agents questioned Greenglass again. This time, they accused him of passing atomic information. After 12 hours of questioning, Greenglass confessed to espionage. He was told he faced a possible death penalty. He was urged to name others. Former FBI agent John Lewis.
While interviewing David Greenglass, I asked him who had recruited him into Soviet espionage. He hesitated for a while, and then he said, well, John, I know you'll find out anyway. There's no use to me playing cat and mouse with you. I might as well tell you. It was my brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg, and his wife, my sister, Ethel Rosenberg, that first recruited me.
To seek to prove that the Rosenbergs were in fact involved in espionage, the government had to have the cooperation of David and Ruth Greenglass. How had the Greenglasses come to provide the testimony that convicted their sister and brother-in-law? The Greenglasses' lawyer, O. John Rogge.
I would say at about the third session with Ruth, as I outlined to her the possibilities. One was the right to remain silent, but I had to add that David's already talked. Another one was to go to the government and see what consideration I could get for making them government witnesses. And I remember Ruth's response very well. It was, what are we waiting for? Then I said to her, well, I've already started it. I felt that I had an arrangement with the government whereby, for providing the government with witnesses, namely Ruth and David Greenglass, that Ruth would be left out of the indictment, and she was, and that David would have a sentence of no more than 3 to 5 years. But when it came to Judgment Day, the judge wrapped himself in the flag, went overboard, and began with death penalties.
David Greenglass was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He served 10. Many of the unanswered questions that contribute to the doubt surrounding this case grow out of the Greenglasses' testimony and the role the government had in its development. The FBI files on the Greenglasses could contain the answers that might settle that doubt. We sought to have those files made public. We were told they would be made available. That was 3 months ago. Now we are told to protect the Greenglasses, the files are to remain closed. What of David and Ruth Greenglass? We found them, living in this house. They've taken new names. They chose not to talk with us about their role in the government's case against Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. For these 12 Americans in 1951, the choice was ultimately not what is the evidence, but whom do you believe, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg or the government of the United States? Like most in the America of Joseph McCarthy, these jurors chose to believe the government's witnesses.
I would say Harry Gold had what is known as an eidetic memory. He could remember detail, dates, descriptions, right to the nth degree.
Well, I think Greenglass was believable, and I based that opinion on the fact that he already had pleaded guilty, and I think he was just trying to make a deal with the government to get a lenient sentence.
To hear as a brother really trying to put his sister in a hole, all I thought of, well, this fellow's telling the truth to save his own skin, as it were, and not of his wife's, you know, because well, she was a witness also. She corroborated his testimony almost word for word, and as hard as they tried to break it down, they couldn't do it.
The jurors in America's Atom spy case. We found 9 who are known to be alive today. 5 agreed to appear. Who were these jurors? They were all remarkably similar in background, education, employment, and what they read and what they had learned.
I feel about treason pretty much the same way as I feel about murder, rape, kidnapping, which includes hijacking, I think the maximum penalty should be imposed.
During my younger days, the idea of a communist connoted something evil or dirty. It was a dirty word, actually.
It was very, very important that we try to keep these secrets to our own government. We were the ones who perfected it. And anybody that wanted to release these to any government, regardless of who it was treasonous. And we thought at the time that it was. I still think it would be.
It was right after World War II, relatively short time after. The Korean War was going on, and communism was communism. It was a bad thing. After all, we'd helped them in World War II, bailed them out, and here they are coming back at us any way they could, taking over all these European nations and making slave states out of them. So I think the feeling against communism was much more prevalent then than it is today.
They had been systematically selected from an original list of over 300 prospective jurors. The prosecution, but not the defense, had access to FBI reports on each. Carefully excluded were all Jews in a city with 1/3 Jewish population, all liberals in a city known for its liberalism, all readers of any but the most conservative publications in a city with a wide and varied press. They were a jury of the Rosenbergs' neighbors, but not their peers. Morton Sobel, the almost forgotten man in the Rosenberg-Sobel case. The prosecutors included him in the conspiracy indictment because they sought to demonstrate that the Rosenbergs were the center of an espionage ring. Sobel had not been accused of stealing atomic secrets. His crime may have been little more than once having known Julius Rosenberg, and in choosing the wrong time for a trip to Mexico. The only person testifying against Sobel was his former roommate and friend, Max Ellicher. No one else supported Ellicher's testimony. Ellicher stated that on several occasions, Sobel talked to him about espionage, and that on one occasion he saw Sobel visit Rosenberg. Ellicher faced a perjury charge before he became a government witness. After he testified, he was never indicted. Morton Sobel spent 18.5 years in prisons, 5.5 in Alcatraz. He never took the witness stand in his own defense. Morton Sobel.
I didn't feel angry when I heard Max Ellicher lie during the trial. In fact, I pitied him because I knew him to be a weak person, and I blamed myself in a sense for having associated with him, knowing him to be what he was.
Why didn't you take the witness stand during your trial?
If I took the stand and the prosecutor were to ask me about my Communist Party affiliations, that in the eyes of the jury at that time, if I were to admit having been a member of the Communist Party, that this by itself would be enough to convict me of espionage. And in addition to the question of the Communist Party membership, the other point the government would murder me with was on the question of my trip to Mexico. Initially, when we went to Mexico, there was no question of flight. It was while in Mexico that the Korean War started, Julius was arrested, Ethel was arrested, that we became frightened in view of all these events, and that the matter of flight really arose. This fright led me to do foolish things like using pseudonyms when I traveled around Mexico looking for a way out. The FBI got the Mexican security police to kidnap us fairly brutally. I still have a crack in my skull, and take us back to the States.
He was not kidnapped, in my opinion. He was apprehended by the Mexican police, and they brought him to the border and kicked him out of their country.
Originally, when I was arrested, I had not been indicted. And as a matter of fact, I was not indicted for several months later. It was during this period that they tried to get me to become a witness against Julius and Ethel. The first thing the government agents, the FBI, told me the following morning when they met me was, did I know that I faced the death penalty? And they kept telling me that I would face the electric chair if I did not cooperate.
I told him that in the event he cooperated with the United States government, that we would certainly bring to the attention of the proper authorities his cooperation so that it could be taken into consideration in disposing of his case.
To me, the thought of cooperating with the government, that is to perjure oneself and accuse an innocent person in order to save one's own skin, the thought I find so horrendous that it is entirely foreign to my thinking.
I consider your crime worse than murder. I believe your conduct in putting into the hands of the Russians the A-bomb years before our best scientists predicted Russia would perfect the bomb has already caused, in my opinion, the communist aggression in Korea, with the resultant casualties exceeding 50,000. And who knows but that millions more of innocent people may pay the price of your treason.
Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were put to death for having stolen the secret of the atomic bomb. Was there ever a secret to be stolen? The co-holder of a patent on the atomic bomb, one of the scientists who developed and armed the weapon, Dr. Philip Morrison.
Superiority was based only on having been there first. They said this is the secret of the atomic bomb, but I say it is far from that. There is no great secret of the atomic bomb. This is a crude caricature of the structure of one particular model, without enough detail to make it possible to reproduce or even to understand as it was drawn, since it contains some errors. What more could you expect from a man who was himself very little training with a high school education and no direct contact at that time whatever with any but the simple mechanical parts that he might have seen as he worked in the shop where he made the lens molds.
What are lens molds? Are they secret?
Well, I think it's an important technical device, and an experienced person in high explosive work will understand that lenses are a natural thing to try, and I think they would get it out. Now, maybe that hint of one word is worth something. I think probably it is. Especially since the Americans have succeeded, then perhaps it tells you which way to go. I would not say it is a worthless piece of information, but to call it a secret of the atomic bomb is a vast exaggeration, a dramatic, eloquent exaggeration. From 1945 on, there is certainly no atomic secret. The secret is out. Fission will make it work. There are thousands of little secrets. How do I do this? How do I do that? But there are 60 ways to do every one of them. Obviously, I do not myself know how every part of this thing is made and works, though I think I was pretty intimate with it. It's just too much for one man to know, too much for one book to tell, too much to write on any piece of paper. Volumes of technical skill, laboratories full of people, factories, machinists, machines, all sorts of things. That's what it takes. It's an industry, not a recipe.
They were the first and only Americans ever put to death for espionage in our civil court history. If there was no secret to the atomic bomb, then what was their crime?
In the face of the Korean War, in the face of the loss of atomic bomb superiority, the fact that here people could be found who perhaps had made this whole thing possible, give a simplified answer by saying they had given away a secret, made sense to a lot of people. It gave them some feeling too much for something they could fight and something they could oppose, and made a kind of national unity in which were lost many of the values and almost the peace itself.
In my judgment, if the Rosenbergs had been willing to tell what they knew about Russian espionage, we would have had the most gigantic espionage case in the history of this country.
Well, this is a case that involved great feeling. And I suppose there are people who look upon this as a political case. I don't. To my mind, there wasn't any doubt from the very beginning that this was an espionage case and was not a political case, wasn't a civil rights case, wasn't a civil liberties case. It was espionage.
And I think this case basically is a fraud and a frame-up.
If it had been a frame-up, which it was not, it would have had to have been a very gigantic conspiracy.
Very often when a frame-up is done, it isn't done on a mass scale and involves a whole host of people on just the entire matter. Little bits of evidence, quote, get developed. And possibly the last person to receive the evidence might believe it's true, although the donor of that evidence might know it's false.
And it was a case that was very much desired. It was a case which could prove the connections between communists and espionage and a desire to aid the enemy, the Cold War enemy.
It didn't follow that every American communist was a spy or an enemy. However, a devoted communist, the idea is he's devoted to the principle of overthrowing this government by force and violence.
In and around 1950, the department perceived the Communist Party in the United States to be an extension of Soviet communism.
If you take Julius and Ethel, for instance, their idea of communism was to make a better world for all the poor people, of which they were two.
I think I approached the Rosenberg case and these others from a somewhat objective standpoint, and I don't think I was swayed by just by the communist menace. It was an espionage case against specific people based upon specific facts.
That these people did not feel themselves participating in a frame of, any more than the Watergate people felt that they were participating in a burglary. The Watergate people felt that they were participating in an act of patriotism to keep the Democrats out of the White House. These people felt that they were participating in an act of patriotism to awaken the American people to the dangers of communism.
When a government seeks to repress a certain group of ideas, it will go beyond the pale of what is legal and justifiable in order to accomplish the end.
The evidence has stood.
So we'll go to our next discussion round section.
Thank you. So this trial happened, they mentioned several times now that this trial has happened around the start of the Korean War. And basically, this was right after World War II in the Soviet Union period with peaceful coexistence for the period that we were allied with them. But I guess the question that I have is like that 5-year, 6-year time frame between 1945 to 1951. Did somewhat of like the media play a lot of a role in this and kind of waging information war against the communists that would have led to just like the liberals sitting on the trial to think, oh, you know, these are some communists, these are some Reds, we have to prosecute them? Or if anyone can answer that.
Thank you for your question. One thing to keep in mind is all of the espionage that they are alleging in this trial took place on June 3rd, 1945, when we were still allied with the Soviet Union and fighting the Japanese fascists. The Germans may have just been toppled, but we were still allies in a war at that time. And I would not say there's one particular thing that turned everyone suddenly in the 50s into the Red Scare mode, but definitely from government actions, and then with that being spread out in media, newspapers, it kind of set the whole Cold War idea. And then also the Soviets exploding the atomic bomb. Well, suddenly there's now another power that has this thing that once America had, so now we got to go whatever, fight them. If someone has a better answer than me, please. Comrade, you haven't spoken yet tonight. Go ahead.
Obviously, it was, as said, a series of things, but what's often regarded as the big event that started the Cold War was a speech by, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a speech by Winston Churchill where he coined the term Iron Curtain to describe the Soviet Union. And this was when the mainstream West started really reiterating all of the propaganda that the Nazis had been using against the Soviets.
That is definitely one thing. Also remember how that juror said, well, and then you had all the the Russians going out and enslaving all these other nations and making them slave colonies or going on. So, but Comrade Angelo, did you want to respond as well?
Yeah, remember when somebody was saying, after all we did for them in World War II, this was way back there. It was the Soviets that did it for us. They won the Battle of Stalingrad. They lost the 27 million people. Notice the way the American press tells the people, we helped them with Lend-Lease. That was the reason why. It's a joke. It's a joke that the American people to this day think that they won World War II. They didn't even invite the Russians to the D-Day activities in Europe. Think about that. It's turning the world upside down. Thank you.
We have liberated Europe from the Nazis. They will never forgive us for it. Comrade, you have the floor. You haven't spoken yet tonight. Go ahead.
I feel a good answer to the question as to what was influencing their opinions. Look up William Randolph Hearst.
Right.
Sometimes people describe it as the Hearst press. A modern iteration of that might be like the Murdoch press or whatever. He is the inventor of many famous publications around the world to this very day, like the New York Times, like the San Francisco Tribunal, like I'm forgetting papers. They all kind of are the same anyhow. I think that's a very simple explanation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade. Also remember William Randolph Hearst had the term of, or his journalism was called yellow peril journalism or yellow journalism, as he stoked race hatred on the West Coast in the early 20th century. And he was also a special press correspondent for Nazi Germany and the Italian fascists. Comrade, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, from what I was looking at recently about Morton Sobel, it was the Rosenberg-Sobel trial, it wasn't just the Rosenberg trial. It really is a misconduct or really a lack of good trial, or you could just say due course of the law, that he wasn't tried on a separate case. The only evidence that was against him was his roommate, that Max person, that said that, Julius tried to recruit me, and Sobel went along with him. There was nothing else to indicate him, which is why he did not speak at the trial, that he took the Fifth Amendment and just didn't speak. But it seemed like that didn't go in his favor because it was all a setup. It didn't matter what he said either way. And he was arrested and kidnapped and beaten on the side of the head. And while he plead to have an investigation that was
60
denied.
seconds.
Then he was sent to Alcatraz, where it's not the best conditions. So it's sad what happened to the Rosenbergs. Obviously, it's a travesty. It's pretty sad what happened to Sobel as well. That's all.
Thank you, Comrade. Comrade Andrea, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try and summarize my thoughts, but for all the talk and all the propaganda about spreading and upholding democracy, remember everybody, and to anybody who's new, if capital feels threatened, like giving atomic secrets, they will break all their own laws to get at you and try and stop it. Now, we're not even like atomic engineers, so I'm just, fair warning, this could happen to anybody at any time, so be careful, comrades. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Andrea. If there are no other hands, and I haven't gotten any messages of new people, so we'll go to our final section. So this last section is about the carrying out of the death sentence and the final hours of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. So we will go back to the presentation.
1953, the Supreme Court of the United States, in a 5-4 decision, has denied a final review of the Rosenberg case. For over 2 years, Emanuel Bloch has gone from court to court, from judge to judge, pleading his case. 15 times he had lost. Because of federal practice, no appeals court had ever reviewed the testimony or the reliability of the witnesses or the evidence. Only the original trial judge or the president could change the sentence. Harry Truman has left the presidency and the problem to Dwight David Eisenhower. In response to worldwide appeals for clemency, Attorney General Brownell had sent Prisons Director James Bennett to Sing Sing. He carried the hope of a stay of execution in exchange for a full confession. The Rosenbergs had answered, by asking us to repudiate the truth of our innocence, the government admits its own doubts concerning our guilt. We will not help purify the foul record of a fraudulent conviction and a barbaric sentence. Our respect for truth, conscience, and human dignity is not for sale. History will record, whether we live or not, that we were victims of the most monstrous frame-up in the history of our country. It is June 16th. As Justice Douglas prepares to leave for vacation, he is approached by two newcomers to the case, Fike Farmer and Daniel Marshall. They argue that the Rosenbergs were tried under the wrong law. They say the Rosenbergs should have been tried under the Atomic Energy Act of 1946. Had they been, the present death sentence would have been illegal. Justice Douglas considers the arguments. He remains in Washington studying the briefs into the night. It is Wednesday morning, June 17th. Justice Douglas has decided the argument has merit. He grants a stay of execution. The Rosenbergs will live, at least until the court reconvenes in October. Gloria Agron, attorney and assistant to Emanuel Bloch.
I remember sitting in the Supreme Court building in the evening that the Douglas stay came down. Or the day before, it came down in the morning. It was probably the only good day we had in the entire Rosenberg case. There was a sense of tremendous release, even though it would have meant to us that they lived only until the October term of the Supreme Court. But that was not tomorrow. That was October, and this was June.
The stay of execution brings to Washington one of the Rosenberg prosecutors, James Kilsheimer. He comes to urge Attorney General Brownell to fight the stay.
I think that if the death penalty was ever warranted for any crime, it was warranted in this case. I was somewhat distressed because I knew that this would lead to another series of appeals which would delay the case for months. The United States was taking a terrible propaganda bath in the press, both here and abroad, and the case had, in our opinion, been fully reviewed.
Within hours of the Douglas decision, Attorney General Brownell requests a special Supreme Court session. The move reflects Brownell's resolve to proceed with the executions. Chief Justice Vincent complies. He calls the justices back from vacation. Gloria Agron.
And then we started running again. We went back to work on our second petition for clemency. We went back to work on the papers on which Justice Douglas had ruled. We tried to create papers on new legal issues. I don't know whether they were good or bad, but they were new ones. We had to have something to go in with. And that was Into the Dawn.
Thursday, June 18th. The Supreme Court is reconvened in an extraordinary session. Outside, the press awaits a decision. At Sing Sing Prison in New York, preparations for the executions proceed in the event the stay is vacated. At 6:29 p.m., the court recesses until the next day. In Toms River, New Jersey, the children of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg wonder at the ways of the world. Friday morning, June 19th. At the White House, the Rosenberg case is discussed at a cabinet meeting. Emmett John Hughes, the president's assistant, recalls an exchange between Attorney General Brownell and Eisenhower. The president said he was impressed by the honest doubts expressed in the letters he'd seen. If the Supreme Court decides by 5-4, or even 6-3, he says to Brownell, then as far as the average man is concerned, there will be doubt. Brownell responds, well, who's going to decide these points? Pressure groups or the Supreme Court? He tells Eisenhower there was evidence that wasn't usable in court, showing the Rosenbergs were the head and center of an espionage ring in direct contact with the Russians. Noontime Friday. The fate of the Rosenbergs is in the hands of the special court session. The vote is announced. It is 6-3. By 2 votes, Douglas's stay has been overruled. The Rosenbergs will die in 11 hours. The majority decision seems to urge executive clemency, at least to Emanuel Bloch.
I'm now reading from Mr. Justice Jackson's opinion. Vacating this stay is not to be construed as endorsing the wisdom or appropriateness to this case of a death sentence. Needless to say, the 3 judges who voted for us were obviously appalled by the death sentence. So that you have 9 judges of the Supreme Court who are questioning the death sentence here.
At Sing Sing, preparations continue for the executions. In cities across America and beyond, hundreds of thousands gather in silent protest. 11 o'clock is 6 hours away. All eyes turn toward the White House. The president responds. White House Press Secretary Murray Snyder.
The following is part of a statement just issued by the President of the United States. I am not unmindful of the fact that this case has aroused grave concern both here and abroad in the minds of serious people aside from the considerations of law. In this connection, I can only say that by immeasurably increasing the chances of atomic war, the Rosenbergs may have condemned to death tens of millions of innocent people all over the world. I will not intervene in this matter.
Well, we called the president, and we were not to be put through to him, but to one of his secretaries. And we hung on the line for almost 35 minutes with no one on the line, not a secretary, not an operator. We called back and we hung on the line again for a half an hour. And obviously we knew no one wanted to talk to us.
On 17th Street in New York, thousands gather for a final protest. One of the organizers, Emily Allman, remembers.
We did not expect the execution to take place. The day before we had gotten the stay, we had arranged to have a public meeting on the 19th to celebrate the fact that they would be alive. When we learned that morning that they were going to be executed, the sense of disbelief was enormous. We were there, we spoke, we kept waiting and hoping to hear that the sentence had been commuted.
At Sing Sing, David Rosenberg is denied a final visit with his brother Julius. 11 o'clock is 5 hours away.
At one point, we did convey to Brownell that this was the Jewish Sabbath, and that the execution should not be on the Sabbath. Not, I believe, that any one of us was religious, nor do I think that the Rosenbergs were religious in that sense, but just because time was life, and it was important. Well, I guess Brownell understood that too, because the word we got that he would do it before the sunset.
Now, the execution will be at 8 o'clock. It is 2 hours away. At Sing Sing, an open telephone line connects to J. Edgar Hoover's office in Washington. On 17th Street in New York, the crowd swells. Emily Allman.
Time, in a very real sense, as it does on many occasions when you're under this tension, sort of expanded. Every minute became a long time. A terrible sense of sorrow, terrible sense of grief, which we were sharing. I think most of the crowd felt that it could have been any one of us.
In Washington, in J. Edgar Hoover's office, they wait for word on the open line from Sing Sing. The Rosenbergs have been told for the last time that if they speak out, they might get a stay. At Sing Sing, the only response is the voice of Rabbi Irving Koslow reading the 23rd Psalm as Julius Rosenberg follows silently into the death chamber. Inside the White House, the president is preparing for dinner. Outside, Morton Sobel's wife, Helen, ends her 2-year struggle to save the Rosenbergs. 3 blocks away, at the Statler Hilton Hotel, Gloria Agron and Emanuel Bloch answer a phone call.
And then just as it was getting to be 8 o'clock, we got a phone call from New York saying the executions have begun. We never heard it on television. We turned it off. And I think all that existed afterwards was silence and a blood-red sun.
It was the poet-philosopher Santayana who said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it."
And with that, we will go to our final discussion and wrap-up section. So if you have any questions or comments, please use the raise hand function. Comrade Angelo, you have the floor.
I'm crying. I'm sorry. It could have been any one of us. It could still be any one of us. All we wanted was a decent world where there was no exploitation. And this is what we get for it. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Comrade. Comrade Massachusetts, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you. I can't help thinking that, something like this could happen again because of the way things are now. Imperialism is in decline, and I see, think anti-communism and the way it worked back then is not that different from what we're seeing with the way people are pushing back on Palestine protests now, with the accusations of anti-Semitism, and that coming by the entire ruling class who's just going along with it, even though they know it's just garbage. And but on a positive note, that it is the decline of the empire, so things might get dark, but I think a better world is going to inevitably be happening because of our work and
60 seconds.
And because of conditions of the decline of the empire. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade. Comrade, you have not spoken yet tonight. You have the floor.
Yeah. Here's a quote from Ethel Rosenberg in my, what did you call it, research on today. And, oh, darn. So what did it happen? It went away. Let's see. Okay, let me see if I can get it up. But one of the things, while I'm getting it up, I wanted to say, one of the things that has dawned on me, this happened in 1953. So what are we looking at is about 50 years. And the one thing that I can't help thinking is that because we never have been told the truth, that this story will never die. And that's why 50 years ago, to this day, we're going to hear about this for the next 50 years if it is not resolved.
60 seconds.
Yeah. And I'll just say, here's one of the quotes from Ethel Rosenberg. At the present moment, with little or no detail to hand, it is difficult for me to make any comment beyond the expression of horror at the shameless haste with which the government appears to be pressing for our liquidation. And I think that's one of the best quotes in relation to this day.
Thank you.
And another letter, one of the last letters that she wrote with Julius, it was that Ethel wants it to be known that we are the first victims of American fascism. And I think we see that. And what the Communist Party went through in the 50s, I mean, they really did see America going in the way of fascism. And really what's happening today is a progression of what they went through. I don't think their deaths went in vain. I think because of it, we have something to look back at. It's kind of like a silver lining in it. And to say that, we need to bring it back, we need to reopen it, because like they mentioned, they were tried on the wrong law. They should have been tried on the 1946 Atomic Energy Law. And that was a travesty in itself. So on the legal accounts, why can't we bring it back? Well, of course, that would it would exonerate them, in my opinion. But that's all. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. I just had I wrote this up just a second ago because I felt like it was poignant. But in response to Angelo, to add on to what Angelo was saying, I think this would be relevant. It's our job as communists to illuminate the darkness in our world. Lights shine brightest in the dark.
On that point of rushing, we're kind of seeing a lot of things right now in the modern world happen incredibly fast. With the rise of fascism all over the globe, notably in the West, we see the erosion of civil liberties as well, happening at a very increasing and terrifying rate. But the thing is like, for years, this stuff was just dormant. I mean, this happened in the 50s, and then, the Communist Party got arrested or charged under the Smith Act and went to prison. But then for years, we saw a government that was dedicated to destroying the Soviet Union. However, in the recent years, we see the government going in a direction that is more, mask off, if you can say. So that's just something that I wanted to bring up today is like, the times that we're going into seem to be a lot more reminiscent of what is the taste of what we're getting.
Thank you, Comrade. Comrade, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Yes, I forgot to mention that the sons, the Rosenbergs, asked Obama for a pardon, at least for their mother. They felt that she was basically collateral damage based on all of the research that had been done up until 2008. But Obama did not give them what they wanted. Just want to let you know they did try. And Obama did not give at least Ethel exoneration for being charged for a crime she didn't commit.
Thank you, Cameron. Okay. So we will go to our wrap up now. So normally we do end with the International, but I would like to end tonight a little more sobering. This is an outline reading of the last letter Julius and Ethel Rosenberg wrote to their children.
June 19, 1953. Dearest sweethearts, my most precious children. Only this morning it looked like we might be together after all. Now that this cannot be, I want so much for you to know all that I have come to know. Unfortunately, I may write only a few simple words. The rest of your own lives must teach you, even as mine taught me.
At first, of course, you will grieve bitterly for us, but you will not grieve alone. That is our consolation, and it must eventually be yours. Eventually, too, you must come to believe that life is worth living.
Be comforted that even now, with the end of ours slowly approaching, that we know this with a conviction that defeats the executioner.
Your lives must teach you, too, that good cannot really flourish in the midst of evil. That freedom and all the things that go to make up a truly satisfying and worthwhile life must sometimes be purchased very dearly. Be comforted, then, that we were serene and understood with the deepest kind of understanding that civilization had not yet as yet progressed to the point where life did not have to be lost for the sake of life.
And that we were comforted in the sure knowledge that others would carry on after us. We wish we might have had the tremendous joy and gratification of living our lives out with you. Your daddy, with me, in these momentous hours, sends his heart and all the love that is in it for his dearest boys. Always remember that we were innocent and could not wrong our conscience. We press you close and kiss you with all our strength. Lovingly,
Daddy,
Mommy,
Julius.
Ethel.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening tonight. Take care.